Hello, loyal listeners of the Bullshit Hour universe. You are about to listen to an episode about the first appearances of Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. The subject is very near and dear to my heart, and that is why it was somewhat disappointing to discover that, while still perfectly understandable, my audio, and only my audio, sounds a little funky. Everyone else sounds great, and I guess that's really the important thing, but I just wanted to give you a bit of warning so you won't be caught off guard. Anyways, enjoy the episode. So I'm not going to put that on the episode. But,
See, that's why you don't randomly record stuff.
well, no, I have my editing machine.
That's right.
There you go.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out up until the part where I said I'm not going to put that in the episode, and then people will really wonder what was said.
There you go. That's creating the old suspense.
It's going to be like that joke where you those movies where you hear the punchline but you don't know what the joke is and it drives people nuts.
Exactly. Like this
This
one's
is
eating my
true.
popcorn, right? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, right. Why? And that's why the rhinoceros was wearing glasses.
There you go. That'll work.
No soap radio. So, what am I doing now? I'm doing something of a multi-part episode. This is exciting for me because I'm like doing first appearances, and I've been obsessed with these three first appearances. But before I go into what's actually going to happen, because anyone listening to this knows what we're going to be talking about because they read the title and all that stuff, I would like to introduce the panel here. We have Mr. Keith Bliss. How you doing, Keith?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. I have to say though, your response to that question, your game is kind of going down. You're not answering in the.
I mean, I could tell you like my life's shit right now. My air conditioning broke and I'm working like 60 hours a week, but nobody wants to know that. So they're just gonna be like, it's fine and everything's sunny and nice and stuff.
And you live by the beach.
And I live by the beach. See, everybody
Okay.
likes the glass half full response.
Right. And of course, we also have Jason Gurin. How are you today, Jason?
I am well. My AC also broke, but I got it fixed.
Nice.
Wow, it's like a thing here.
It's going around. It's going around, I guess.
And in keeping with the theme of this particular episode, we have the first appearance of our special guest, Mr. DJ Nik. How are you, DJ Nik?
Hey guys, I'm doing really, really well. I don't have a broken air conditioning. I guess I can go and break it, in order to level the playing field if you wish. But
Don't jinx it.
That's okay because mine isn't broken either, so it could just be like a halfway thing. Now, Nick, you have been on previous Bullshit Hour episodes, but nothing quite so structured as this. So this is going to be a little different.
Wait, this is structured?
A little bit. It's structured-ish.
Fair.
Right.
Organized chaos.
Because we know what we're going to be talking about, but we don't know how we're going to be talking about it. Anyway, as you may have known, because you looked at the title of the episode, we are talking about the, Holy Grail, the Trinity. Is that the right word? The trilogy.
Moly.
The trilogy, not the Trinity, of first appearances. We will be talking about the first appearance of Superman, the first appearance of Batman, and then something like 23 years later, the first appearance of Spider-Man. And those are like the big three. When you think of first appearances in comic books, those are probably the first three that come to mind. And I guess we'll just jump right into it. Are we all ready for this?
That's
Sure.
good.
All right.
Rip the Band-Aid off.
We'll rip the Band-Aid right off and we'll get right into it. Superman first appearance, Action Comics #1, released April 18th, 1938 by creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And that is all the backstory I'm going to be giving you because no one wants to hear about the history. They just want to hear about the story. And what is the story in Action Comics #1, the Superman story? There's like 4 different stories in 13 pages, right? So what this was, it was originally released as like newspaper. Oh, not released, but it was originally written to be newspaper strips. And then someone said, "Hey, I want you to put your Superman story into my Action Comics magazine that I'll be releasing next month." And they said, "Okay." And so, what do we have? Like this very brief overview of how Superman was from a planet from, and I didn't even realize this until today. The planet was destroyed by old age. That is a direct quote from the comic. Destroyed by old age.
Damn that old age! How dare it?
Damn old age planet, or damn that lazy writing. It was destroyed by old age. And then, we get this baby who's able to like lift the table. And then all of a sudden, he's like flying with this bound and gagged lady who he like puts down on the, what is it, like the governor's lawn or something. And he says, "Hey, listen," to the governor, "this lady is actually the one who's guilty, not the one that you're about to execute. And I have a signed confession." And what does that mean? Before he tied her up, he said, "You're going to sign this confession, God damn it." So what we have here is really a forced confession, not so much a actual confession, but I guess that's how it works in the comic book stories. So what do we think about this first part of the story where like, I don't know, Superman is already causing chaos and wreckage and, like really picking on the governor's assistant. Let's go DJ Nik. What do you think?
Well, I mean, first off, I want to say that it's amazing that Siegel and Schuster even got this published because they'd been trying to publish Superman for ages, and at last, DC Comics at the time took a chance on them and got to publish it. When it came to this particular story, I mean, we will see throughout the course of the story that Superman doesn't take on any supervillains, but just sort of petty thugs, if you will, which I think is an interesting touch. And not to mention, Krypton is not even mentioned by name, which is actually curious too. When it came to this particular moment, I'm like, yeah, I mean, the guy is guilty, so fair enough. I mean, they didn't execute an innocent person, so he did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, well, we can only assume that that's true because all we get is that Superman said, "I found the real killer, and I got her to sign a confession." So, I mean, without any investigation at all, they were just like, "Oh, good, we'll kill this person instead." Let's see, Jason.
So you mentioned earlier that it was only a certain amount of pages going into this. I think you said 13 pages. So
13 pages
they had to cram it in quickly. We kind of had to read between the lines what was going on. We couldn't get the full explanation. We wasn't 32-page books quite yet.
Nope. Okay. Keith?
I'm kind of with him based on the context of when this came out. Even like the vibe of it reminded me of, and people are going to laugh at me, old school Rin Tin Tin, because it was more of it was a strip. And if you look at the art style and kind of how it was presented, it definitely, for some odd reason, made me think of that old school comic strip. So considering they basically took a bunch of short stories and smashed it into one longer story, I give them credit for what they did. They accomplished a lot, and they didn't really flush it out because, at the time, this was a comic strip, and we're just going to give you a guy who can do stuff, and we're going to go with that. And there weren't necessarily a lot of moral gray areas at the time. It was kind of like, this is the thing, this is what we did, and go.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a funny thing about the Superman first appearance is that, Siegel and Schuster actually worked together on previous comics, and I was just sort of like, a couple of years ago, looking through some old comics that were on the internet, and I was like, this one looks oddly like Superman. And then I looked at it, and it was, Siegel and Schuster, and I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. So basically, they just use that face for everyone. Mm-hmm. As of right now, like I said, it was originally like those panels were drawn as newspaper strips, and they were like, okay, well, instead of making up a whole new story, let's just throw these together and make this oddly erratic story. But it's the first appearance, so it doesn't matter. It's not like they were expecting anything. It was just, hey, there's Superman. And so this goes immediately to Superman going and beating up this guy who was abusing his wife. And then the guy faints after he stabs him and his knife bends and breaks. And it's like, okay, that's like the whole story. That takes place over 2 pages. And then that goes to Clark Kent working at this is the Daily Star at this point, not the Daily Planet.
Hmm.
And he goes, "Hey, Lois, how about a date?" And Lois says, well, all right, I guess I'll cut you a break," which is what every guy loves to hear from
The
a girl.
pity
Like,
date.
yes, absolutely, the pity date. That is right, the pity date. So they go on this date, and Lois is just sort of like, "Yeah, I don't really want to talk. Let's just dance," pretty much. And this guy, Butch, excuse me, not Butch, Butch, goes and says, "Hey, Scram, I'm cutting in. Scram, McFly, I'm cutting in." And I don't know why. Now, the thing says Clark Kent doesn't want to reveal his identity as Superman, which means he has to be a complete coward. I don't get it, because you think, hey, I can be a regular guy and not let this random stranger push us around like this, right? So, I mean, whatever. He's like, "Oh, just dance with him and we'll leave." And then she goes, "No, fuck you, I'm leaving." And Butch gets really angry and finds Lois's cab, drives it off the road, and kidnaps her because she wouldn't dance with him. Then Superman shows up and throws his car against the wall, and all the people in the car fall out, which is obviously the famous cover. So that's the end of that story. Shall we go around? Let's start with Jason.
So just as reading this, as recently as this past week, it's just so different for us in this modern age where we've read so many Superman stories. We're reading these 13 pages. It's like, wait, there's so much more that's supposed to happen. And it's like, so simple, but I don't know. It seemed to still work though.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it still held up. Like it still hit all the beats that Superman's still hitting on today in some ways.
It did,
Minus the crazy villains, of course.
Right, well,
I mean,
yeah.
we didn't get to that point, and he didn't fly.
Given that it was in 1938, it had comics had a different kind of beat to them, as you said. So I guess you could get away with it back then. You could never get away with something like that in a comic book today. It's just like they would never. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry, Keith.
No, I'm kind of with him. It's a product of the times.
Yeah.
It reminds me, going back again, reading it now from when it came out, it reminds me very much of Marty McFly, the whole Back to the Future, where had to, oh, it's okay, it's only Biff, and just kind of trying to roll with the punches and not, for lack of a better term, grow a spine. In that time frame when that came out, the weaker individual had to be meek. So he had to really be like, "No, don't hurt me, blah, blah, blah." Instead of, people nowadays where you try to cut in and somebody's going to say no or whatever the case may be.
And you're going to get stabbed.
Right. You're going to get jacked and,
right.
Whatever it is. But it's the product of the times, basically.
All right. Nick?
I very much agree with Jason and Keith in the sense that you kind of have to put it into context of this is the late 30s, where, I guess in the States, obviously, World War II was not yet a thing yet, but, Germany was 1 year away from invading Poland in Europe. But over in the States, the gangster films were a big, big deal. So it was all about the tough guys. And it was all about, the world is not a place for the weak. And it is to be, it's governed by the strong. And so that is something that you see a lot in gangster films of the epoch. And of course, I'm sure we'll talk more about this when we get to Batman as well, because that is very much, I think, a product of the pulp and gangster thing, which was very much a thing at the time. So it totally makes sense to me. I mean, sure, it wouldn't fly today, but I think in that particular era, it resonated with people in the sense that, it's about the strong man. And that's pretty much what it is. Ironically, written by two Jewish guys, and they're talking about a Superman. So I think that's kind of ironic right then. And fun story. Hitler actually got his hands on a copy of a Superman comic and called Superman a Jew. So he was not happy with the Superman comics.
Wow. Okay. I mean, hey, look, it was like we're all saying, the product of the time. So Adolf Hitler would have gotten his hand on a copy of those particular books. So I want to take a pause for a second here because I thought about this before. We are all just so used to the name Superman, right? But when you think about it, people are like, hey, let's come up with a character that we're going to put in a magazine. What should we call him? How about Superman? Like, you really think about it, take a step back. You never heard the word Superman before in your life. It's kind of a dumb name, but it's a household product everywhere you look. And that brings us to the final part. Clark Kent gets assigned a project in what is it, like South America, and then goes to Washington, D.C., which I don't really get why he was assigned the thing in South America. But anyway, he goes to DC and he finds this corrupt senator politician, and he, basically, long story short, forces another confession out of someone in the same issue by throwing up around, and terrifying the fuck out of him, saying, okay, I'll let you down if you confess. And the guy's just like, okay, fine. So that's the end of of the first Superman story. Let's just go around the table one more time. We'll start with Keith.
It's an interesting way to get results.
Yeah.
I guess again, this portrayed him more of, I don't want to say it, but he is kind of a bully. Yes, he strong-armed him into a confession, and I guess they just didn't have a better plot device at the time. And again, since you're dealing with such a short strip of information, you kind of have to, cut the fat out of it. So what's the fastest way to do it? Torture the asshole. Okay, let's go with that. And they seemed like that was perfectly fine, tossing him in the air and doing all this crazy stuff to get a confession. That was no big deal. Okay.
That's that.
Exactly.
Nick?
I think, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but, seeing that Siegel and Schuster grew up in abject poverty, and this was obviously the years of the Great Depression and the heels of the Great Depression, so people were going through a hard time. And so I'm thinking, coming from the working class, politicians were seen as the evil. And so that's why I think is the reason why we get Superman taking on a corrupt politician, because he's literally speaking for the people, because obviously those without power are not able to, take these people to justice and serve justice when it comes to the corruption within the political world. And so I think in this case, this was our boys literally making a dream come true for the working class, as in there is justice for them as well.
Okay. And we come around to Jason.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it was a way to come up with a character with fantastical powers, but at the same time bring him down to earth and let him connect with other people who are thinking the same. I mean, obviously nobody's a Superman, but to see a Superman do what we all want to do or take care of the business we want to take care of, and put that in the time frame of the 30s, where that's what that's what's going through people's minds, and that's who they could consider their villains during that time. Since there was no wars at that, or wasn't at the big war yet. Anyway.
All right, I gotcha. Okay, so I promise that for the rest of this episode, the stories will not be divided into so many parts, because this Action Comics #1 Superman appearance, which, by the way, Action Comics #1 had 4 or 5 other stories that, funny enough, most people don't even know what they are. They're just like, okay, it's part of the complete book, and if you want the actual book, you pay me $3 million and you get all the stories with it. And it's a good deal, I suppose. So, if you have Action Comics #1,
good for you.
good for you. I mean, and I don't mean like a facsimile. I mean, if you have the actual thing, I believe it was $3.25 million. That was the sale of a 9.0 grade copy in 2014. So that just goes to show, even a shitty ass 1.5 copy would go for something like $200,000, $175,000. So and as I discussed before, those things, once they get down to that quality, they look absolutely disgusting, grotesque. It's not something that I would want to look at, and therefore not something that I would want to own. I'm not putting it up on my wall. Here's my disgusting comic book. Take a look. Anyway, so that's my take. on comic book collecting and Action Comics #1, and we move on to the first appearance of Batman, Detective Comics #27. Batman was created by Bob Kane, and Detective Comics #27 was released March 30th, 1939. Now, this story actually just follows one arc. It is only 6 pages instead of the 13 that the Action Comics #1 was, and it was in response more or less to, hey, Superman is popular, let's make more superheroes. So we did this with Batman. Now, here's the story. This guy named Lambert is found stabbed to death. I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. We meet Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne. Commissioner Gordon gets a call about Lambert, who's been stabbed to death, and invites Bruce Wayne to come along to view the grisly murder, because that's what you do. You invite your friends. Yeah,
exactly. Best
Yeah,
friends.
you invite your friends to come and watch the murder investigation. So we see this guy named Lambert. He's been stabbed to death, and we think his son did it. And it turned out very shortly after that the only reason his fingerprints were on the knife was because he took the knife out of his father's back. Because that's what you do when someone's been murdered, is you take the knife out of their back. Because, I don't know. I mean, I've never seen my father stabbed to death, but I don't think that I would take the knife out.
He was trying to save him.
He's trying to save him. But yeah, exactly. It was 1939. They didn't have the practices that they do today. You're supposed to leave the knife in so that the blood doesn't all splatter out, right? It's pretty standard procedure. So anyway, it turned out Lambert has 3 partners, and one of the other partners gets murdered immediately after, and then the third partner goes to this guy Stryker's house, presumably to warn him about the murders, and finds himself in a gas chamber. Oddly, Batman just happens to show up, saves him from the gas chamber, and it turns out that Stryker wanted to take over their company, and he didn't want to pay any money to do it. So he hired someone to kill all of his partners and get rid of their contracts. And then we find out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And that's the end of the story. Nick, why don't you get us started here?
Well, first off, I will say that I absolutely love this story, as imperfect as it can be possibly by today's standards. And I will also add that even though he wasn't credited here, Bill Finger is one of the main creators of Batman. Bob Kane pretty much took all the glory for the longest time. And finally, Bill's name now figures as the co-creator of Batman. And I'm really glad for it, because he has had a very tragic story, and I'll mention about that when we get later down the line. But he literally was buried in the potter's field. He died poor, penniless, creating one of the biggest characters in the world, and was buried in the potter's field, which is a very tragic thing to my mind anyway. But that aside, as I mentioned before, this is very much when film noir and gangster films were the bee's knees, and everybody was all about that kind of stuff. And here's very much what you get with this first story of Batman. I think it immediately sets the tone for what a Batman story is like, as in it's all about, the gangsters and the mobsters and the mob, literally, if you will. So, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, aside from the fact that Batman does kill someone in this particular issue, and later in later issues actually uses guns. That was taken away later. But
He killed Stryker. Okay. So before, I'm sorry, I'm going to let you continue in just a second.
No,
but there was something odd about when he killed Stryker, because Stryker set up the gas chamber. And then they ended up on the top of the staircase, and Batman pushed him into a vat of, what was that, like toxic waste or whatever it was. And it's like, so he just kind of just randomly has this vat of toxic waste laying around just in case you need to push someone off and kill them. I mean, yeah.
Never leave hope with that one.
Yeah.
I mean,
but yeah,
I just picked my vat up, so I don't.
Yeah, no, I got you.
I guess he's kind of almost like a proto Punisher, if you will. At least here is what he was doing, because I believe the quote is literally a fitting end to his kind. And and so Batman had more that bloodlust, if you will. So it was very much a pulp comic, if you will, where it was about, the bad guys die. They don't get a trial, if you want, like Superman, who takes people to be kind of tried. It is very much almost that Daredevil Punisher vibe, if you will, where they're so different in their way of meting out justice. So I appreciate it. I mean, yeah, it is a little bit violent, if you will, but those were the 30s for you.
Yeah, and now Keith and Jason and we kind of brushed on this a little bit in our first episode of the about comic books, saying that Batman was violent and the Batman villains were violent and everything was dark and everything was violent until about like the early 50s until like the early 70s, where everything was just campy as shit. So yeah, that's why I like those really early Batman stories.
Yeah.
Guy gets pushed.
I will also add, it's hilarious that Batman wears purple evening gloves in his very first appearance.
Yes.
He's doing dishes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he's like, oh, someone's being murdered. I should stop doing the dishes. Anyway, let's go to Jason. Let's go to Jason now. Let's talk about your thoughts and views on this story.
This 6-page extravaganza. It was great. I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a completely different Batman than the one we know and love now.
Right.
He didn't have the same code. He didn't mind, getting his hands dirty and actually finishing off the villains. And as soon as I saw that bat, I mean, it's been a long time since I read this previously, up until just today. Actually, I reread it again this morning, and I was like, I'm getting Joker vibes here. Because I mean, obviously, I didn't read the next issue. I was like, is Stryker going to come back as the Joker at some point? I'm like, or is this early inspiration for how we're going to make a Joker? I don't know. It was cool.
You know what? Maybe, I mean, it was never said implicitly, but maybe that was him. He got pushed into a vat. That was Joker's,
one of the versions.
That was Joker's backstory. So hey, maybe Joker is Stryker. Alfred, by the way, funny enough that they used that name for his butler after that, Alfred Stryker. So we go around to Keith. Keith, talk about your thoughts and views.
It's very interesting, like you guys have touched base on. It reminds me very much of The Shadow, the pulp character, which came out, I think, looks like 10 years prior, almost 10 years prior.
Yep.
And The Shadow kind of had that same vibe, except he had guns and he did kill everybody. He had no qualms with murder. So I think they loosely, and they're never going to obviously admit to it, but it was loosely inspired by that, just for the sheer fact they had very similar characteristics, mannerisms. Hell, Batman, like we've joked about already, had a gun at one point. This was very much before he had that moral compass ingrained into him. So he was more, like you said, Punisher, Shadow, vigilante type of character. And then I guess they realized they need to be a positive role model instead of murder everybody role model. So they reeled it in. It's fun to see his roots. You see his origin and see him evolve over the years.
I will also interject there, Keith. I think a lot of folks these days see the Shadow and Doc Savage as being the prototypes for Superman and Batman.
I would agree with that. The Doc Savage and Superman.
All right. Now, we fast forward 23 years. Amazing Fantasy number 15. June 1962 was the release date. There's no specific date on that one. But the funny story about this, Spider-Man, one of the most successful superhero characters of all time, was given a shitty spot in a shitty magazine because no one thought that he would be a successful superhero. So they were like, hey, we have this magazine called Fantasy, which I think only for the last issue they renamed Amazing Fantasy for some reason, even though they knew they were going to be ending the series. So they were like, you know what? Put your Spider-Man in that one, go nuts. And I think that was Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Steve Ditko.
Oh, Steve Ditko. Okay, I'm sorry, not Jack Kirby. Forgive me. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And they were also kind of going back and forth with a couple of other writers, but they were, those two were the big ones who came up with most of the ideas and most of the, how he looks and, his personality traits and all that stuff. So what do we have? We have Peter Parker, who's in high school, and man, people love to hate Peter Parker. They're all like, hey, Peter Parker's a shitball. All right. And they make him cry and they do all that stuff. But he has a good relationship with his aunt and uncle. They're all like, hey, we bought you a telescope. And he's like, cool, I love telescopes. And so he goes to this, what is this, like a science demonstration where they're like, oh, we're going to show you how we're going to do this with a molecule and, like transfer atomic energy or whatever the fuck it was.
Field trip.
Field trip. It was just a field trip? Oh, that's boring. Okay, so anyway, so he's there, and this like spider gets in the way of the atomic bullshit, and in its last dying breath goes, hey, Peter Parker's hand looks appetizing. I'm gonna bite it. And then he bites it, and Peter Parker, after a lot of drama for like a couple of pages, turns into Spider-Man and says, how can I use my power for good? I know. I'll go join a wrestling match for $100. Cool. We do that. And then he says, well, fuck everyone else because everyone's a piece of shit. The only people I'm going to be nice to are my aunt and uncle. So he becomes a famous TV sensation. And then he like lets a robber go. And later on finds out that his Uncle Ben was killed. And he's like, well, I'm going to go find this guy who killed my uncle, who's like holed up in a warehouse. And it turns out it was the robber who he let go. And he said, well, fucking shit. If I had just stopped him like I should have, my Uncle Ben would still be here. So now I should be a superhero. And that is the first appearance of Spider-Man. Jason, your thoughts?
I loved every second of my reread of this today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story that's been told so many times in so many different ways, cartoons, television, movies. We've seen so many versions, and this one still works. I just love it. And just one of the weird things I noticed just reading it today was just how Peter, I feel like he's a little bit more of an angrier teenager than we see in the retellings, where he's like, yeah, I'm going to get you guys later, or you bullies really are, where we see now he really doesn't, I don't know. And even in modern retellings, they kind of omit that part of his mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tobey Maguire didn't exactly seem like an angry guy. He seemed like nonchalant, but he didn't seem angry and vengeful. Keith.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jason and everything. It was an interesting read, and like you said, the angry, nerdy kid type of vengeance, they definitely watered down in all the subsequent retellings of the story, but it was very interesting to see in its original, entirety, because he was kind of an angry kid because he was bullied. And as anybody who has been bullied, I myself being one of those included, you're an angry little kid because you're being bullied and you want to get vengeance upon those people. So I kind of relate to that to a certain extent. Obviously, I don't have really cool spider powers. I wish I did, but I digress. So it was interesting, and I like the artwork for the time. I'm one of those. I'm very art driven, so I appreciated it, and it very much fit its era very well.
Yeah. Okay.
Now it looks corny as hell, but back then it actually worked perfectly.
In the early 1960s.
Yeah.
When what else did they have? They had Fantastic Four was like one of the only ones that actually predated it, and that looked ridiculous. Like it didn't look cool at all, but that's why I love it so much. Nick, your thoughts?
Well, when it comes to this, first off, I will say it revolutionized the way a superhero could be conceived when it came to comics, because up until that point, we'd all had grown men and women who were superheroes. And the concept behind this, and Stan Lee actually mentioned this, was he turned the sidekick into a superhero, into the protagonist. And that is very much what it is, because he is a kid. Because up until that point, the kids were the sidekicks of the main superhero. And so I think that's obviously a very revolutionary idea for the time. And it spurred so many other teenage superheroes. So I think it was very clever, first off. Secondly, the fact that Steve Ditko wrote this, he very much poured himself into this character. A lot of folks have said that this is very much Steve, in the sense he was the nerdy type. He was the guy who was picked on. And so he literally created Peter Parker as an extension of himself. And so I very much see that. Not to mention, I also think that, we could, a lot of us can relate to this. And you also think to yourself is, what would you do if you had superpowers? Most of us in the light of day say, oh, I would stop the war, and oh, I would protect the poor people. I have a feeling a lot of us are like, yeah, I might rob a bank. Yeah, I might actually go in and enter a wrestling championship and win tons of money, and maybe the more selfish things. So I think it's also clever in that sense of he doesn't feel the need to, oh, I have these powers, I will defend humanity. It's like, no, I want to make a couple of quick bucks. So it makes sense, if you will, because I think it would be disingenuous maybe to think that every other kid who got superpowers immediately wants to do good. Most of them will probably want to create havoc. So it makes sense, and I absolutely love this. A seminal issue to a character that we love so much.
We'd all turn into the Spot from Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah, I would, most
man.
likely. I'm a super villain in the making, for sure.
Oh, 100%.
So let me ask you something. Now, you're talking about Spider-Man being a teenager, and like the teenager is always the sidekick. I think that was touched on, but not, as a main hero with Johnny Storm of the Fantastic Four. He was part of an ensemble. He wasn't a sidekick, but he wasn't his own hero.
Right, he didn't have his own book, if you will.
Right, yeah. Until much later, where he sort of starred in a couple of Marvel team-ups, but it's not really a whole lot. It's, Spider-Man is the main attraction. And what I love about Spider-Man, and all of these characters who were established in the Marvel universe, who, like with Superman and Batman, they're all like, oh, I'm going to do good and I'm going to bully evil people into confessing their sins. The people in the Marvel universe, they're regular schmoes who just happen to have superpowers. And, they don't abuse their superpowers, even though they are given chance after chance after chance to. They're like, I can't. It would not be right. And, I respect that about the Marvel superheroes, is the moral compass that they actually like have, rather than the early superheroes in the DC universe, who kind of, they do, but not really like the kind that they should have. So yeah, that's that. And I suppose that will wrap up the holy trilogy of the 3 first appearances in the comic book universe. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to add to the discussion?
I'd just like to say what you just touched on with the difference between the Marvel and DC with the first, there's a 20-year gap there. So
yes, that's
right. I can't bang on DC for the way they handled it at the time.
Okay.
I will also add that for the longest time, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but a lot of people have almost equated DC to being the more conservative when it came to the characters and the way they acted, and Marvel being the more liberal, if you will, when it came to their characters. And I think you can definitely see that, not just in folks like Spider-Man, but even down the line when it comes to even characters like Doctor Strange, for example, which very much embraced the counterculture and the hippie culture, whereas DC tend to be, as I said, it was more corporate, it was more conservative. So a lot of folks almost see DC as being more right-wing, if you will, and Marvel being more left-wing.
I will only leave it as I can see that. And yes, I certainly see the parallels. And, well, I suppose if there is no more to be said, I love these first issues. I have read each one of them at least 20 times. I go back and I just look at them because they're so fast and they're so like, man, this is so much fun to read. It's fun to see how they originated, because when you see the first appearances, especially back in the 30s, no one expects anything to come of it. No one expects it to be super successful. These are just like, hey, here are my drawings of a guy in a blue suit and red underwear on the outside. Cool. By the way, did you know that Superman did not wear boots in the first appearance? It was basically just like feety pajamas that he was wearing. So
his super onesie.
Yeah, super onesie. And that's that. I want to invite everyone to join us next time when we talk about Forever Evil. It was a 2013 to 2014 7-issue series that I am currently halfway through. and looking forward to finishing it. It's different for me because it goes beyond my wheelhouse of comic book reading. So it's going to be an interesting episode for me to talk about because it is so like, whereas in the 60s and the 70s, things were a lot more cartoonish. This is a lot darker, a lot more evil, as the title implies. So, yes, join us for that. And let's open the floor for some plugs. Let's see. Jason, you wanna start with your plugs?
Well, first off, just with the Forever Evil, I'm super excited that you're reading it, and I cannot wait to talk about that. That was a book I had taken almost a 20-year break from DC Comics, and Forever Evil got me back into DC for quite a bit.
Nice.
Plug-wise, find me on Facebook, Jason Durian. I am an admin on a page called Comic Book Villains. We have a lot of fun over there, and that's it.
Cool. Keith?
Yeah, I'm with Jason. I enjoyed Forever Evil. I'd actually kind of been on and off with the DC universe because I have a love-hate relationship with them. So the Forever Evil was definitely a very fun read. I'm looking forward to your take on it, considering this is your first time and I've owned the issues. I had to dust them off and everything because I'm that hardcore of a DC fan.
Nice.
In terms of random plugs, I'm on some podcast with some guy named DJ Nik about some movies and stuff. I forgot the name of it. Nick, what was it called again?
I believe it was Happiness in Darkness. That's the
bathroom. Happiness in the bathroom. Something
Happiness
like that.
in the bathroom. Yes.
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Fun in the shit or something. I don't know.
No, you're getting his podcast mixed up with mine. Bullshit.
That's fair.
Yes.
That's fair.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, we the Happiness in Darkness. We talk about movies based on superhero comic books, stories, whatever you want to, pick your poison. This week we actually just reviewed Into the Spider-Verse. Nick and I had a blast reviewing it, like we always do. Next week we are going over Highlander 2, which again is going to be so much fun because this is new to DJ Nik. So I cannot wait. I'm so excited. So yeah, you can check us out there. It's posted every week, and occasionally the three of us do this crazy comic book thing.
Nice. Yes. And DJ Nik, your plugs.
Well, as Keith rightfully mentioned, you can find him and I on Happiness and Darkness, and we're having a blast on that. And funny enough, him and I actually off air talked about Forever Evil, and I really enjoy that story. So I'm looking forward to listening to the next episode and what you guys think about that. I mean, I know a lot of folks are not big fans of the New 52, but I think that was a really, really great story, in my honest opinion. When it comes to me, aside from Happiness and Darkness, you can find myself, Rachel Friend, and Zan Sprouse on Gold Standard, the Oscars podcast. We're reviewing all the Best Picture winners in chronological order. This week, we're actually going to be taking on Crash, the Best Picture winner that everybody hates. So it'll be interesting to see what we make of it. And also myself and Charles Skaggs can be found on the Fandom Zone, where we take on superhero TV shows. We're currently reviewing Superman and Lois. We reviewed the last season of The Flash. So, and then, of course, once Secret Invasion comes up, we'll be reviewing that as well. And last but certainly not least, you can find me at my day job on the Whiskey and Cigarettes radio show, where we play today's country, traditional country, and everything else in between. And more info about that, you can visit our website, which is whiskeyandcigarettesshow.com.
Excellent. And as for me, John Seymour on Facebook, JON space SEYMOUR, sitting behind a drum set wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt, and that is me on Facebook. You can also, you can email into the show, BSHOUR, the number 6 at gmail.com. That's BSHour6 at gmail.com. I'm using the same platform, but I'm using a different picture when we talk about comic books because it's way too much effort to make a whole new platform. There's no reason to. I already have a humble but loving fan base. So that's me there. And you can find me on Twitter, BS_HOUR_Seymour, SEYMOUR. That's me on Twitter, BS_our_Seymour. And don't miss Mad Tea Party. We are playing an acoustic gig at the Pearl River Saloon on June 18th. That's an acoustic gig, not a full band gig, but it's still fun. You can come, you can talk to us. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a blast. And of course, don't miss Greg Vorob's podcast, Star Trek: The Undiscovered Podcast, where he talks about Star Trek oddly enough. Never would have guessed that. I will be on an episode in the next couple of weeks talking about the Wrath of Khan as one of the guests who is not very familiar with Star Trek. I've been on an episode before. It's a lot of fun to do, and I look forward to doing the next one. And of course, again, look forward to discussing Forever Evil with you guys. And on that note, I will say goodnight, Jason. Good night, Keith. And good night, Nick. Thank you so much for guesting on the show. It
My
was a lot
pleasure.
of fun to have you. And that'll be all. Good night, everyone.